Well, g'day there guys. Mark and Dakar coming to you again from the French Alps on this week's edition of the Future of Travel. Dakar is just getting a little bit hot there. It's about 30 degrees here in the French Alps. I'll just spin that camera around so you can see me here. As you've seen for the last couple of months, we've been doing a weekly series about what's happening in the travel industry. What's likely to change for digital nomads, remote workers, what's changing for the industry. So here we are, Thursday 9th of July, doing another update. Still in a most beautiful part of the world in summertime, beautiful 30 degrees day today, so absolutely glorious. So now it's a big list today, so I'm going to be talking about borders and testing and market prices and airlines and reconfigurations and packages. So let me just pick up my notes and get into this. So a lot of properties, a lot of hotels, gîtes, hostels, B&Bs closed around the world. Some of it has been exacerbated by some cities cracking down on the short-term rentals market, the Airbnb sort of model. Here in France, there's been some court cases which have been won against Airbnb and some of the hosts. So there's a little bit of a crackdown happening around the world, but by and large, there's a lot of the world's properties are still missing in action. They're still closed, particularly the hostel market. Which has been very buoyant the last couple of years. It's going through a really tough time. We're continuing to see remodeling. We're seeing the dormitories disappearing. We're seeing single rooms, double rooms, twin rooms all opening up, different configurations. We're seeing a number of hostels that can't reconfigure closing permanently. In more mainstream, next level up, the gîtes, the B&Bs and so forth, we're still seeing a lot closed around the world. Prices are down. I'm going to put my hat on and sort of say about 40% across the board, discounts in prices at the moment. But that's likely to change, as I'll talk about some of the changes later and what's happening. We are seeing new properties, new modern properties, more reconfigurable properties opening. We're seeing co-working spaces coming back and new ones opening in areas around the world. The growth in the remote worker market, even if they're not nomads and leaving their towns, the growth is actually growing very strongly. There has been millions of people and companies right across the spectrum saying we are now remote. You have full flexibility, not just for the COVID isolation period, but for a longer period of time. Amazon's been leading the way in that. We saw what Twitter was doing. Facebook's still hedging its bets. Long-term players like Microsoft have been expanding some of this. There's some very big companies that are just going completely remote. One I was reading about this week out of the UK, they have 1 million contractors completely remote. Those people are going to be out as soon as they can, exploring some of the world. So let's look at what the exploration has been going through. Crossing borders, certainly in Europe, got a little bit easier. 15 external countries were added to a list last week. They're varying that list on, well, not quite daily, but a couple of times a week at the moment, to allow people from areas that are considered safe or they've had low virus infection rates. They're allowed in as third-party countries, third-nation countries, into many of Europe. Europe has the EU side of things, the Schengen side of things, have been very standardised. The non-Schengen part of Europe is still a bit hit and miss. They've got different standards. For instance, we've been trying to get back to Bulgaria. As some of you know, we keep a motorbike here in Europe, and at the moment it is stuck in Bulgaria. And as Australians, without permanent residency, we've got long-term residency, but not permanent residency, we're not permitted into Bulgaria at the moment. And then we've had some outbreaks again. So Australia hit the news in the last week, particularly around Melbourne, the second largest city in Australia. 5 million people are now in lockdown. The state borders are being locked down against Victoria, the state around Melbourne. and it's causing massive headaches over there. We've seen another outbreak in Serbia. So if you've been tracking, Serbia cracked down really hard initially. They got on top of the virus infection rates, and they were one of the first to ease off the restrictions. Well, they've had another outbreak, and the government jumped down hard with restrictions, and it's prompted riots. So if you were unlucky to be stuck in Belgrade, which is a pretty cool city, you could have been caught up in riots that invaded their parliament building this week. So safety and security isn't just about viruses at the moment. Civil unrest is pretty high. Had a good chat with Paul Gibbs, a friend and business colleague of mine that's managed to escape Chile this week, get back to Australia, and he was talking about Latin America and Chile and riots and general unease happening right across major metropolis areas of South America. So that's something to bear in mind. I said we're looking at about 40% dropping off in prices. There's been a very strong movement to rural and regional areas to go and visit, both internally within borders and crossing borders, like Europe is still able to. That's actually putting a bit of pressure on some of the rural hotels and so forth, because their neighbours haven't opened. So there's a little bit of an imbalance happening in places, and you could actually be paying higher to go out to a lovely nature area, a bit like I'm in today, to stay there because there is so much demand. We talk about so much demand. I'll switch back to Australia. The state of Queensland, the second physically largest state in the country, third largest in population, has had its borders shut for many months. They are opening their borders, and currently there is about 20 kilometres worth of cars and trucks and caravans lined up with their pieces of paper trying to cross the border. It's taking some time. And in Victoria, there's over an hour delay just crossing the state border. And it's more than 100 years since Australia had any border control between their states. Actually 119 years. 1901, they abolished that in Australia. We're also seeing niches growing right now. You can see a group of people. Hello! Hiking is very big. Hiking very strong, a lot of outdoor activities. Again, sending people into the bush, into the forest, getting away from highly concentrated cities. Big demand. This road I'm on, apart from having hikers coming through. Now remember, it's Thursday, it's the middle of the day. It's a group of 4 people, not of retirement age, having a nice midday hike. It's 30 degrees, so pretty hot by French standards for a lot of people. But this road actually goes up to a nudist colony, and we've been doing a range of interviews and phone calls and things from this road. The reception's actually really good. And we've been seeing a really strong traffic going up to the nudist colony up the back of the blocks here, up over my shoulder, about half a kilometre. So niches are really taking off. Aviation, we've been seeing, has been taking off. Paul Gibbs, again, this week's conversation over at Business and Bare Feet, he talked about domestic hot air balloon business and aviation going quite well in domestic environments like Australia. We're a little bit out of the valley for ballooning here, but we are actually looking to get out there and see what's going on, because it's just that beautiful time of year to be flying over the Alps. So let's look at airlines. Another tough year. Still waiting on governments to make up their mind. Advice out of some of these places, again like Australia, saying they're not going to have their borders open for another year. The WHO in the last 24 hours said this virus could go on for 5 years. It's a multi-year economic disruption. It's having a big impact on businesses, those that particularly rely on cross-border activities, a lot of international tourism. It's hurting a lot of those people. It's not a flash in the pan. It's not going to be fixed up anytime soon. It is time to think about diversifying your market and moving on to other things. And that applies to remote workers and freelancers and founders. While on one hand there's a great increase in digital products, digital customers has gone leapfrogs. Online meetings have been huge. that's great. But if you're selling a product that still needs a physical delivery, maybe a little bit interesting, then you may find that you have to pivot to domestic markets for whichever country you're in. Worthwhile having a look at all of those things. At the same time, we're seeing a big increase in the tech around social media. As I said earlier, today I'm playing around with Instagram feeds live. Haven't done it before, and certainly the tech is getting harder and more complex. And so is the marketing surrounding it, because people are chasing those tribes of people. They're chasing those communities that they're trying to connect with to sell a digital product. So it is getting fairly noisy in the digital world right now. All right, let's have a look. Borders. Serbia, shut. Austria said, that's it. You come from Serbia, 14 days mandatory quarantine. What does that do? Well, it means the flights stop, and it means people have to reroute their overland drive trips, bus trips and things like that to avoid being locked in a country 14 days after 14 days after 14 days. Nobody wants to live their life in isolation. The last few months have shown us all of that. So what you're seeing is that airlines, when they're restarting, are starting to run, I guess it's a bit like a pop-up shop. They're running short-term trips, short-term links. You can grab a flight somewhere, it's a special flight open between, pick a city, Manchester and Bucharest. Okay, for the next 3 weeks, X airline is going to fly Manchester, Bucharest to and from 3 times a day, and great, at good prices, good old-fashioned cheap prices like Europe's been used to for a while. But then it's likely to stop. Border restrictions kick in, greater demand pops up somewhere else. If there's any business demand kicking in, the business airlines which pay more, the business customers pay more, business airlines will switch again. So don't expect that when flights are reopening, they're going to reopen permanently again. It's going to be pop-up flights for a while. Prices are looking good. The competition between airlines is very hard, very high. And as we talked about last week, there is both a oversupply of airline personnel and an undersupply of pilots, depending on the aircraft type. So depending on how good the companies are at recruiting, holding on to their staff, orchestrating their pay rates, will depend on who's going to win and who's going to lose again over the next 6 to 12 months. The other thing to think about is that there is a greater increase in people purchasing a package tour. You may not be the package tour. We're not the package tour sort of people. But if you want to go somewhere, a package operator that does everything from maybe collecting your bags at your home and escorting you to the airport and keeping you safe as you cross through the paperwork, the borders, onto the plane, all the great training, off the plane at the other end, into the hands of a meet and greet, off to your accommodation out in the bush, ready to do your chosen activity. Whether it's skiing, whether it's flying, whether it's hiking, mountain biking, whatever your chosen activity is, there's certainly an increase in adventure, and the adventure operators are getting organised to be a bit more package orientated to make it easier and simpler for you to choose in a very confusing world. Makes sense. So you might not have taken a package tour for a while, you might still be that adventurous person, but you might find that it's a back to the future. It's time to look at taking life a little bit easy, to get that adrenaline hit, to get that exploration, to get that cultural hit, whatever your thing is, that might be really interesting. All right, keeping moving. Domestic market is going to become the strong focus for a number of countries. With borders being unknown, flights unknown, to keep their industries going, domestic market is being propped up by a range of leading countries at the moment. Britain has just announced they're going to subsidise restaurants and cafes and so forth to try and drive demand back to this sector of the economy that has just been locked out for 4 months or so now. Britain again dropping the VAT rate down to, I think, 5%. I was reading 5% VAT on hospitality and tourism related services. Well, that makes things a little bit easier. Keeps the cafe and the restaurant and the takeaway a bit more of a chance to stay alive a little bit longer, keep employing people a little bit longer. So that's looking good. Visas is another interesting one. This week we saw Barbados launch a 12-month, they didn't launch, they testing the markets. They are considering launching a 12-month digital nomad visa to allow you to arrive into Barbados, stay for a year, work there. Again, tropical, not necessarily crowded if you're coming out of New York or Miami or something like that. Good weather, newly remote, still got a good job back in the US or Canada or somewhere with a direct one-stop flight. And maybe they'll drive in, a couple of $1 billion worth of new businesses as people get up and go explore this part of the world, which they've never really had much of a chance to before. Again, the country has pivoted away from masses of tourists doing short-term vacations, leisure vacations, which was predominantly what was going on in there, and they're switching to a new market. Having seen the level of aggression coming out of places like Montenegro, I expect a lot more of this around the world in the next month, particularly while summer is still here in the Northern Hemisphere. Uzbekistan, as I talked about last week, giving you a $3,500 COVID insurance policy. They'll give you money and help you overcome your sickness if you happen to pick something up in this country, which has actually been very lightly touched. So again, countries, governments are stepping in to try and bolster their travel market. So keep travelling, just go in there with your eyes open a little bit more. Go in there thinking safety, not just COVID safety. Masks are going to be normal everywhere. I think that's pretty obvious. Washing your hands, great. We've had months of practice with this now. Higher density or higher volume of clearing up our hands and so forth. But we're also looking at social unrest, transport links and so forth. So keep in mind that things are going to be a little bit more risky in some areas and better in others. Interesting enough, I've been on the phone 3-4 times this morning already with Africa. Africa, which has got some pretty hard numbers around COVID. There's some pretty high infections, particularly in South Africa. But they're trying really hard. They're pushing really hard to open up and get the nomads and remote workers down to explore in Africa. There's a lot of new initiative and activity. There's a lot of pivots going on in Africa. And if you haven't been to Africa, this is actually normal. No 2 days are the same in Africa. As they say, this is Africa. It changes on a whim. And so you're seeing a lot of change, a lot of opportunities, and some really bright people doing some really interesting things. So the next couple of years might actually be a great time to get down and explore some of those areas a little bit further afield. Again, watch out for your war zones, political hotspots, insurgencies, riots and so forth. But, you got to roll with the punches sometimes. All right, let's just look at my notes here. I'm going to give you a couple of takeaways. There's a fair likelihood that you're probably going to join and travel with a group of others where you can share the decision making in the future, even if you've been a solo traveller for a long time. Just the amount of work needed to research and understand issues means that you might be now creating new communities to travel with a small group of people. Nomads have done that quite well for a while. We expect that to continue. We expect it to continue around certain types of activities. The hikers, the mountain bikers, they will go and do that mountain top that they haven't done before, that hike they haven't done before. Maybe it's time to go and see the Compostela or hike Kilimanjaro, something like that. So we're expecting more of that to happen. It's outdoors, it's adventure, it's fresh air, it's a high excitement for those people that are interested in that sort of thing. Particularly if they're one-flight options, where there's less chance of getting stuck in a foreign country or in an airport somewhere. All right, keep remembering, countries want you as much as you want to travel. Keep an eye out for deals. They may not be there for very long. These windows of opportunities are going to close very quickly, open and close very quickly. So prepared to be nimble. A friend Paul I mentioned earlier, he's been sitting there in the Atacama Desert where he runs a business for a while. They've been locked down since March. not quite sure for a while whether they come back to Australia. Okay, they said, yep, it's time to come to Australia. Oh, flights up, down, different. They bring their dog, so flights became a bit of an interesting activity. And then bang, an opportunity opened. They had 10 days to pack up everything, get themselves packed, drive down the road 1,500 kilometres to catch their flight. That's the sort of stuff we're going to be doing more of. We're going to have to find ways to make this happen, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So be prepared. And really, just looking at my notes, keep an eye out for deals. Keep an eye out for, sorry, now we've got a tractor coming to get me. Keep an eye out for deals and look at pivoting your business to where there are customers, because there's certainly a lot of customers out there today. All right, that's all from me today. See you for now.